Today, we're diving deep, right inside our own heads, to tackle a huge question. Who is really in charge of your thoughts, your actions, and your choices? You might think the answer is obvious, but neuroscience tells a story that is way more complicated and, frankly, way more interesting.
You know the feeling, right? You make a conscious choice. Okay, just 2 episodes tonight, that's it. But a few hours later, there you are, still glued to the screen, kind of wondering, how did this happen? Why am I still watching? That little moment where your own decision seems to get away from you, that's our way in.
And that feeling of losing control happens for a pretty simple reason. You are only aware of a tiny, tiny fraction of what your brain is actually doing. Seriously, most of its work, everything from keeping your heart beating to cooking up your next idea, it all runs completely under the surface, on autopilot. So, who's really flying the plane? To really see this brain on autopilot in action, we can look at a pretty wild glitch in the system, sleepwalking. It shows us just how much our bodies can do, all without a conscious pilot anywhere near the controls.
This is what people often say when they find out what they did in their sleep. And we're not just talking about mumbling. We're talking about complex stuff. Walking around, making a snack. One person even painted a perfect triangle on their kitchen wall, all while they were totally, completely asleep. And they remember none of it.
So how on earth is that possible? Well, it all comes down to a fascinating split. During sleepwalking, the part of your brain that's like the CEO, the prefrontal cortex, which handles rational decisions and self-awareness, is totally offline. It's clocked out. But other systems, like the parts for movement and vision, they're still up and running, just doing their thing on a very sophisticated autopilot.
But wait, it's even weirder. It turns out, it's not just a divide between the conscious and the unconscious. It is actually possible for the brain to be split into 2 separate, coexisting minds, all inside one skull.
We see this incredible thing in patients who have had a pretty radical surgery to treat severe epilepsy. Doctors cut the corpus callosum. That's the massive information highway connecting the 2 halves of the brain. It stops the seizures, which is great, but it also isolates the 2 hemispheres from each other. And the results are just startling. So check out this famous experiment. Researchers flashed the word Texas, so only the patient's right brain, the side that can't speak, could see it. When they asked him, "What did you see?" his verbal left brain, which saw nothing, answered honestly, "I didn't see anything." But then they said, "Draw a symbol for the word with your left hand." And that hand, controlled by the right brain that did see the word, drew a cowboy hat. His mouth didn't know the answer, but his hand did.
And this just brilliantly shows what the lead scientist, Michael Gazzaniga, concluded. This research proved that you can literally have 2 distinct conscious minds in one head, each with its own thoughts and its own awareness, working totally independently of one another. Wild!
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second, because it's not just what's going on inside your brain that's pulling the strings. Your brain is constantly being shaped by outside forces, some from your own life and some from a past that isn't even yours.
A classic case here is Phineas Gage. Back in 1848, an iron rod blasted straight through his head. Amazingly, he survived. His memory was fine, he could walk and talk. But his personality? It was gone. He went from being a respected foreman to being profane and impulsive. And this was the first real clue that your personality, yourself, is physically located in the brain, specifically in that prefrontal cortex.
But the things that shape you can go back even further. I mean, way further, before you were even born. It turns out your brain might be wired in part by the experiences of your grandparents. This happens through something called epigenetics. It means that big life events don't just happen to you, they can leave a biological echo that gets passed down.
In one incredible study, scientists taught mice to be afraid of the smell of almonds by giving them a little shock at the same time. Not only did their biology change, they actually grew more smell receptors for that specific scent. But here's the kicker. Their children and even their grandchildren were born with that same extra sensitivity. They were born fearing a smell they had never ever encountered. A memory was literally passed down through their biology. Okay, so let's just pause for a second. If our brains can run on autopilot, be split into 2 separate minds, and be shaped by stuff that happened to our ancestors, what does that say about our feeling of being in control? Just how real is our sense of making our own choices? To poke at this idea, scientists came up with a really clever experiment. Using a magnetic pulse, they could make a person's finger twitch. At other times, the person would move their finger all on their own. The whole setup was designed to kind of
blur the line between who is in charge, you or the machine.
After every little finger movement, they asked a simple question. But here's the crucial part. On some of the trials, right at the exact moment the person decided to move their finger, the machine fired its pulse too. This created this moment of complete ambiguity.
The results were just staggering. Even when people had just made the conscious choice to move, if the machine fired at the same time, they'd often say, "I'm not sure," or even, "the computer did it." It shows just how fragile our feeling of being in control really is. It can be easily confused.
But here is a fascinating twist. What if this lack of total conscious control isn't a bug? What if it's actually a feature? What if letting go of the steering wheel is sometimes the key to unlocking something amazing?
Take this. Scientists put rappers in a brain scanner. When they performed a memorized verse, their prefrontal cortex, that self-monitoring CEO, was lit up and active. But when they started to freestyle, just improvising on the spot, that same area went quiet. It deactivated. They let go of conscious control, and pure creativity just flowed through.
So where does this all leave us? Well, that feeling you have of a single, unified you sitting in your head, making all the decisions, it's kind of a masterful illusion. It's the end product of an unbelievably complex orchestra of almost 90 billion neurons all working together.
As neuroscientist Bobby Castori puts it, this huge network is constantly working to create a coherent story, a feeling of a single self. It's a really useful story. It helps us get through the day, but it's not the whole picture.
So, the main takeaway is this. You're not a single pilot in the cockpit. You're more like an entire crew. A lot of what you do is run by autopilot. You're shaped by your biology and your past. And that feeling of, "I decided to do that," is often a story your brain tells itself after the action is already underway.
But look, this isn't meant to make you feel like a puppet. It's actually the opposite. Understanding these hidden forces, from your biology to your unconscious habits, gives you a much deeper level of self-awareness. You can start to really see what drives you, and maybe even start to influence the parts of the story you control.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty mind-bending question to chew on. If that sense of you is a story your brain is telling itself to make sense of everything, then who or what is the author?